Thanks. I'd like to just point out that Elizabeth is here today. Hello, Elizabeth. We haven't seen you for a while. Welcome back.
Thank you. The subject matter brought me.
Oh, wow, that's interesting. Okay, let's get started. David, will you do our opening?
Noble community, we gather here together with one another, with all humanity, and with all life on earth. We gather here together on the unceded lands of the Itawan people and in the place where nearly half of all enslaved Africans first stepped onto American soil. We honor our land ancestors with our mindful awareness. We gather here together to deepen our solidity and renew our freshness through mindful sitting and walking, singing and breathing, and speaking and listening. We affirm the capacity within ourselves and all persons of every race, gender, orientation, ability, and tradition to realize peace in ourselves and peace in the world.
Thank you. And I'd like to begin by thanking Andrea for the music and technical assistance, and David, who is going to be assisting me tonight. So before we get started on our first sit, which will be a guided meditation, just move around in your seats and make yourself comfortable. Take a few breaths and let it out before we get started. And I thought I'd do a meditation, a loving kindness meditation towards ourselves. So we're going to start this evening by just being gentle and kind to ourselves. May I be peaceful and light in my body and in my mind. May I be safe and free from accidents. May I be free from anger, fear, and worries. May I know how to look at myself with the eyes of understanding and love. May I be able to recognize and touch the seeds of joy and happiness in myself. May I be able to live fresh, solid, and free.
Now is the time for 10 minutes of walking meditation. There will be 3 small bells before we walk. On the first bell, we rise and stand in front of the camera. Second bell, we bow to each other. Third bell, we commence our walking meditation. And then in about 10 minutes, you'll hear 2 more small bells. For the first bell, we return to face the camera. On the second bell, we bow to each other and go back to our seats. Okay.
Okay, you might want to stretch a little bit even though you've been walking, or take some breaths and get settled in your seat. Um, I was going to say tonight I decided to talk about feelings, but that really isn't true. Sometimes things just tell me what to do and I follow that. So I kept saying tonight I somehow needed to talk about feelings. So this is how I'll get started here. Um, this is a time that we are living in when it seems like people have very strong feelings about things. You know, whether it's politics, the economy, health, the environment, or relationships. That seems like goes on forever, is about relationships. So I just noticed that people have strong feelings, more so than, to me, normal. And it seems like it's easier to focus on what's wrong rather than what's right. And for me, what's going on in our society and our lives today feels like a continuation of what has always gone on. It might be cloaked in different language, or it might just be that we are finally realizing that it is happening to all of us. But little seems to me has changed over the years. Now, I'm not saying things haven't changed, but a lot of things remain the same. All the isms are still in play. Racism, I don't need to explain about that. Sexism, this idea that, women are discriminated against just because we're women. And gender diverse people is in that class of sexism. Classism, prejudice against people because of their social or economic class. Ableism, you don't really hear a lot of people talk about it, but I am sure you can think of something that comes to mind about what happened. I don't know if it was this presidency or another one. Discrimination against people with disabilities, making fun of people who have disabilities. Ageism, which I am beginning to understand a whole lot different than I did before. Targeting older adults or even sometimes young people. We have these ideas in our head about how young people are. I sometimes hear myself saying it. Young people today. Heterosexism, the assumption that heterosexuality is the norm. Cisgenderism. Now, I was not familiar with that. I don't know how many people are, but it says bias that assumes everyone is or should be cisgender, which is identifying with the sex assigned at birth. You hear about that on the news all the time. People can't use this bathroom, that bathroom. As far as I'm concerned, if they put a lock on the door and I go in, it could be a male or a female bathroom. But we got that going. Nationalism, excessive loyalty to one's nation, which includes xenophobia or discrimination against immigrants. When I was growing up, that's all they talked about, is how immigrants built this country. And now all of a sudden we have some issue with that. anti-Semitism, and religiousism, believing that there's only one right religion, and colonialism and imperialism, which is a system of domination where one nation exerts control over another. I don't think I have to explain that to you because it's on the news all the time. Buddhism teaches us that we enter R. That what happens to one of us affects us all. And Buddhism is the ism that I choose to follow and believe in. I am 82 years of age and I am unable to remember a time when there wasn't something that we as a nation wasn't balled up in a knot about. When I was about 12 or 13 years old, somebody knocked on our door. Back then, if somebody knocked on the door, you just opened it. Except my grandmother would say, don't do that, you're letting the evil spirits in. You're supposed to find out who was at the door. And anyway, there was two women at the door. And they asked me if I knew that the world was coming to an end because of how people were living their lives. Now that was my first conscious fear of something that I had no control over, and it caused me to be afraid. I kept wondering, when was the world gonna end? I mean, and I'm sure I asked my mother, because she said I bugged her with all kinds of questions about when the world was gonna come to an end, because I believed if they said it to me that it must be true. Little did I know that that was the beginning of many fears that were to follow. And when I think about it, they're all based on something outside of me. It's not like I'm sitting in the house and I just am afraid. It's usually something that someone does that gives me this idea that I need to be afraid about something. In the heart of the Buddha, Tai mentions that our feelings are in our stored consciousness in the form of a seed. I am sure you have seen the diagram that Heather did with the seeds in the bottom, and Tai has even done that. We've watched videos of him doing that and how these seeds are there. Well, when I listen to the news, the seed of fear or anger is watered, which is then manifested in my mind consciousness. So all of that was in my stored consciousness the whole time, and then something will happen to water it, and then it sprouts up. Tai reminds us that every seed needs to be recognized, whether they are wholesome seeds or unwholesome seeds. And mindfulness determines if we cultivate it or encourage it to return to our stored consciousness, where it can remain dormant. Now, Heather has talked about this so many times, and I have to tell you, sometimes I know what she's talking about, and sometimes I say to myself, what in the world is she talking about these seeds? Well, I can honestly tell you, I get it now. I truly understand that there are seeds that we have planted in our subconscious, and that something comes along and kind of rattles the dirt and the seed sprouts up, and we can water that seed of anger and hate, or we can recognize it and say, wow, here you come again popping up, and just pay attention to it, and it'll shrivel back down and go away. Now that is, to me, is like a very simple statement that I just made. And I know that it's not quite as simple as I make it sound. but it really is. If we pay attention, we have to begin to pay attention to the seeds that want to come up through that dirt. And it's up to us to decide whether we want to push it down or let it come up. And fear is something that is almost palpable in this country right now. So I feel blessed through my participation in Indigo Sangha that I have been taught tools to deal with these concerns and worries. I am reminded by Ty that feelings come and go like clouds in a windy sky, and encourages me to live in peace and harmony with whatever the weather is that's going on inside or out, and to remember that conscious breathing is my anchor. Now I'm going to stop there and have David share some of his thoughts about our feelings. Oh, thank you.
Dave bowing in. I thought before I talk about feelings, I just wanted to mention that today we celebrate Vesak, which is a Buddhist uh, celebration marking the Buddha's birth, enlightenment, and passing. And they say it's the perfect time to remind ourselves of the power of compassion and wisdom to transform our own lives and the world around us. So thank you, Buddha. Um, and hard to follow Jinaki's act there, but I'll try my best. If we're talking about feelings, I guess my feeling is a fear because I always have fear when I have to talk in front of a group. um, but what I did for today is I just sort of hopped around some of my favorite websites on these issues and put in search terms like feelings or Buddhist feelings and found what came up. So my approach will be to start from sort of a Western psychological secular approach and then move into Buddhist psychology and then the Abhidharma after that. So, starting with the American Psychological Association, they define feeling as a self-contained phenomenal experience. Feelings are subjective, evaluative, and independent of the sensations, thoughts, or images evoking them. They are inevitably evaluated as pleasant or unpleasant. And notice in Western psychology, they don't mention neutral, that like they do in Buddhism. But these pleasant or unpleasant feelings can have more specific intrapsychic qualities, so that, for example, the effective tone of fear is experienced as different from that of anger. The core characteristic that differentiates feelings from cognitive, sensory, or perceptual intrapsychic experiences is the link of affect to appraisal. And here they say feelings differ from emotions in being purely mental, whereas emotions are designed to engage with the world. Huh. Yeah, from what I could see, the neural properties of feelings is not well understood. Like neuroscience is still sort of perplexed with it. there's a lot of studies in neuroscience that involve food. Uh, they talk about hedonic tone, which is a property of a sensory or other experience relating to its pleasantness or unpleasantness. And with respect to food or our taste, it says its hedonic tone is the degree to which a taste is appealing or repulsive. And that goes to that Buddhist thing, the repulsion or attraction and all that kind of stuff. Let's see, what do we have here? And then, of course, hedonic tone comes, the word hedonism, which we're all familiar with, is a Greek word. And it was a philosophy that the pleasure of a moment is the only possible end, that one kind of pleasure is not to be preferred to another, and that a man should, in the interest of pleasure, govern his pleasures and not be governed by them. It's an ethical doctrine which regards pleasure or happiness, which I would distinguish, as the highest good. Egoistic hedonism considers only the pleasure of the individual, whereas altruistic hedonism takes into account that of others, where we might want to expand pleasure to others other than ourselves. But again, it's an old Greek philosophy. Then from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, there's a chapter entitled Mind in Indian Buddhist Philosophy. So now we're moving into the Buddhism. The Buddhist view of feelings presents a fluid account of experience as an ever-changing stream of psychophysical events. This dynamic model of human existence comprises the 5 classes of phenomena the Buddha referred to as the aggregates of grasping, on account of our tendency to grasp after and identify with them. And says the Buddhist tradition conceives of the human individual as consisting of 5 types of aggregates, which we've talked about before, that serve as the basis of what we ordinarily designate as persons. So Buddhism says as persons we have these sort of heaps, and they are the material form or the body, the sensations or feelings, which in Sanskrit is the Vedana. There's the apperception, the volitions, and consciousness. Let's see, and with respect to feeling, it includes the aggregates of sensation or feeling and defines the quality of the impressions that result from contact between the sense and its object. Sensations are generally divided into pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. As internal mental states, sensations are both conditioned by and conditioning of the habitual tendencies of past karmic action. Okay, so in Buddhist psychology, the concept of Vedana is translated as either feeling or sensation. Let's see, it says refers to the pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral sensations that occur when our internal sense organs come into contact with external sense objects and the associated consciousness. Let's see, well, there's a lot of stuff here. And then in Theravada tradition, feeling is the mental factor which feels the object. It is the affective mode in which the object is experienced. It says the Pali word Vedana does not signify emotion, which appears to be a complex phenomena involving a variety of concomitant mental factors, but the bare affective quality of an experience, which may be again either pleasant, painful, or neutral. And those again are, we're talking about the five skandhas. And finally, Dr. Alexander Berzin in the Berzin Archives talks about adjusting our innate mental factors. Let's see. Balance sensitivity, that's a good word. I like balance sensitivity requires deconstructing the deceptive dualistic appearances our mind creates and harnessing our underlying deep awareness and natural talents. The Abhidharma literature provides a clear picture of the relevant factors. And then the Abhidharma were a group of, well, it's the teachings, if I recall, of some Indian Buddhist philosophers around a couple centuries before and after the Common Era started. All Abhidharma systems except 5 ever-functioning mental factors. These are urges, distinguishing attention, contacting awareness, and feeling some level of happiness. So, in that system, I guess it's not so much pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral, but levels of happiness. And it says feeling refers exclusively to feeling some level of happiness. In other words, happy, neutral, or unhappy, it is always in harmony with the tone of the contacting awareness that also accompanies the experience it characterizes. So we're almost done. Sorry it takes so long. I've had some Tibetan teachers, they talk about bare perception and then maybe a thought and the thought evolving to a word or a label and then emotions evolving from there. Western psychology always had these old arguments whether thoughts precede feelings or vice versa. And I said, that's about it, really. I'm sorry it took so long, but I hope that helps a little bit. Dave bowing out.
Thank you, David. I sent questions. I don't know if you had a chance to look at them. I sent them today, actually. Um, I thought I had sent them in the notice. Um, so it's time for group sharing. And these are the questions that I ask you to consider. You don't have to talk about these things, but I was curious. What emotions are arising for you most often these days? Are you noticing any patterns or changes in how you feel? How do you relate to feelings of fear, anger, grief, or helplessness? And what practices or teachings help you stay grounded? Those were 2 questions. I'm sorry I didn't separate which was which. And the third was, when you feel overwhelmed, what supports you in returning to the presence or compassion? What supports you in returning to presence or compassion? And what role does Sangha play in supporting you emotionally and spiritually during these times? I mean, I know personally, I mentioned to you that, oh, thank goodness, thank all that is good, that Sangha has helped me in the studies that we've participated in. So I'm going to stop, and if you want to speak, just unmute yourself and do that. Jinaki, bowing out.